Okay, here's something that's fun, and it's when you practice criminal defense law for as long as I have, over 35 years, you have some memorable experiences. One of my fondest was I was in Modesto. We were doing a trial. My client was charged with cultivation of cannabis and possession of cannabis with intent to sell. He had six plants about 5, 6 feet tall growing under the eaves of his house in the shade that were very leggy, very stringy. There was no budding. There was nothing going to happen there. And he had about 75 ceramic pots in the backyard that had 300 plants in them, all about 1 to 2 inches tall, about two, three, four plants in each pot. I asked him about it, and what he told me was his wife had grown a bunch of flowers, and that's what the pots are from. And they were sitting in the backyard, and he found a bag of seeds that he'd had since college. And he was curious if they were still any good or not, so he sprinkled them in the pots. This was in October. So, the growing season, it would have been well over before these plants ever got to mature stage. Not to mention, 3 or 4 plants in a little, half a gallon ceramic pot are not going to get very big anyway. But the cop who testified that it was late in the season and these plants wouldn't put out as much as regular plants, that a regular plant would put out a pound a plant. But these little 1 inch plants in a little, half a gallon ceramic pot, they wouldn't put out the full amount. They'd only put out a third to a half a pound. So the DA goes over to the board and says, well, officer, let's give the defendant the benefit of the doubt. Let's say there were 300 plants, and she writes 300 on the board. And she says, let's say there were only a third of a pound each. So 300 times 1/3. How much is that, officer? The cop pulls out his calculator and 90 pounds. My client is tugging on my shirt. I'm telling him, wait. There's murmuring coming out of the jury box. The judge is kind of rolling his eyes because everyone in that courtroom knows that 1/3 of 300 is 100, except the prosecutor and the cop with the calculator. So as the murmuring rises, one of the jurors yells out, "That's not right!" Now, jurors generally don't talk during trials. It's very unusual. And the judge, admonished the jury and told them that they shouldn't speak out. But then he turned to the DA and he said, Ms. Bishop, I think her name was, he said, "That's not right." Well, now the cop is furiously pounding away on his calculator trying to figure out what's 1/3 of 300. In the meantime, the DA finally goes up to the board, erases where it says 1/3 and writes 1/2 and says, well, officer, 300 times 1/2 is 150, right? That's the that's the cop with the calculator story.